Gather round the campfire, friends. This is a hitchhiking horror story that'll make you think twice before sticking out your thumb. The story starts in 1978 with this teenager named Mary Vincent. She was a 15-year-old living in Las Vegas with big dreams of flashy lights and sequin costumes. Mary had stars in her eyes, imagining herself up on the big stage one day, kicking her heels as a showgirl dancer at one of those classic Vegas theaters. But she was struggling in school and decided to run away from home that summer, looking for adventure. Mary took off with a scruffy boyfriend she had at the time, and they drove out to California. I guess the romance died off quickly, because after a couple of months of sleeping in his beat-up car and getting hassled by the cops, Mary was back on her own. By September, she'd had enough of the whole runaway scene and wanted to head back home to Vegas. But Mary was dead broke with no ride. So, she decided to hitchhike the 500-some miles back across the desert. No big deal, right? People were thumbing rides all over the place back then. It was the 70s. So one September day, Mary stuck out her thumb at an on-ramp heading south. And she wasn't alone either. There were a couple other teenage drifters looking to bum rides too that afternoon. After a few cars whizzed on by without stopping, an old blue van pulled up to the side of the road where the group was waiting. Behind the wheel was a middle-aged dude wearing greasy overalls like some kind of mechanic. He seemed harmless enough. The man told Mary he was headed east to Reno, but could drop her off about 80 miles down Interstate 5 before he turned off. It would at least get her headed the right direction. The only catch was he only had room for one passenger. He wasn't going to cram a bunch of strangers in his van. The other hitchhikers got bad vibes from this guy. They told Mary she shouldn't go off alone with him. Safety in numbers, right? They were headed the same way anyhow. Why wouldn't he take them too? But Mary wasn't worried. She sized up the old timer and felt sure she could trust him, even take him in a fight if she had to. She grabbed her pack and hopped in that van, ready to head down the highway. Off they went. Little did she know, the man behind the wheel was Lawrence Singleton, a violent alcoholic just out of jail. He seemed harmless only because he wanted them to think that. This friendly old mechanic routine was just an act to lure in his prey. And unfortunately, his sights were set on young Mary Vincent that day. The trip started smoothly enough. They rode together in awkward silence for a while under the desert sun. But soon, Mary started to feel uneasy. Singleton kept trying to get touchy-feely, stroking her neck and leaning in too close. She sank back against the door to get away from him. When she accidentally knocked over a milk carton on the floor, the stale smell of old booze poured out. Singleton had secretly filled it with liquor and was steadily chugging from it as he drove. Mary turned to confront him as they passed a sign for Reno, going the complete wrong direction. Singleton claimed he's just made a wrong turn, but agreed to double back towards the Interstate 5 exit. Mary reluctantly believed it was an innocent mistake, but still, things only got weirder. After pulling off at an abandoned stretch of desert road for a toilet stop, Singleton convinced Mary to get out of the van too. As she stood outside stretching her legs, Mary decided she could definitely outrun this old creep if she needed to make a break for it. But when she bent down to retie her shoelace, everything went black. Singleton had come up behind her with a sledgehammer and knocked her out cold. When Mary came to, she was tied up in the back of Singleton's van, stranded out in the middle of the hot, empty desert. Her situation went from bad to absolute nightmare really quick. Singleton held her hostage out there for hours, doing unspeakable things to Mary. Day eventually turned to night as he tortured the poor girl. By the next morning, Mary was battered and broken, desperately searching for any chance to escape. She pleaded with him to let her go free, promising she'd never tell a soul. But rather than releasing her, Singleton said, "Oh, you want to be free, huh? I'll set you free." Then he went rummaging around for his tools and came at her with a hatchet, In one swift swing, he chopped her left arm clean off. Mary desperately grabbed at him with her remaining arm, trying to defend herself, but Singleton easily overpowered her and just kept chopping. 3 more swings of the hatchet, and both Mary's arms were completely severed off. She watched in shock as one of her own disembodied hands continued to clench Singleton's arm after the attack, the muscle spasms causing her severed fingers to tighten their grip. Singleton finally shook off the grip and let Mary's lifeless arm flop to the ground. Then he picked up her limp, broken body and tossed her over the edge of a 30-foot ravine like a bag of trash. Mary tumbled down the gorge, smashing into the rocks below. She definitely had some broken bones from a fall like that. Singleton figured she must be dead, or at least unconscious, and he didn't want to leave behind any identifiable evidence. So he climbed down the ravine after Mary and stuffed her mangled body into a concrete drainage pipe laying nearby. As her bloody arms lay detached up above, Singleton took one last look at his tortured victim and said, "Okay, now you're free." Then he casually whistled his way back up the gorge, hopped in his van, and drove off, leaving 15-year-old Mary Vincent to die alone in the desert. Except she didn't die. By all accounts, Mary should have quickly bled out from those substantial injuries. But hours later, she miraculously woke up, drowning in total darkness. The only sound she could hear was the soft dripping of her own blood draining from her body. Most people would probably slip into shock and die, but Mary found one final burst of energy to crawl her way out of that concrete tomb, driven forward by the sole thought, "He's going to do this to someone else, and I can't let that happen." Step by agonizing step, she dragged herself back up the steep ravine, the rough rocks and thorns shredding up the flesh of her knees and bare feet. With no hands to climb, Mary painfully drove the remaining stumps of her arms elbow deep into the dirt, using them as leverage to slowly drag her way inch by inch over the boulders, until she finally crested the top, blinded by pain, but not yet ready to let death take her. Somehow still alive, Mary stumbled towards the sound of cars speeding faintly in the distance. She just had to make it back to the highway. Surely someone would help her then, right? The first car flew past without even slowing down at the sight of this naked, bloody teenage girl wandering down the remote desert road. Luckily, the next car stopped when they realized Mary wasn't just some teenage ghost or zombie extra from a movie. An older couple driving back from their honeymoon quickly pulled over. They wrapped her in towels and sped towards the nearest hospital. When they tried to ask what had happened, all Mary could manage to mumble was, he chopped my arms off." Though police captured Singleton pretty quickly after the attack, it seemed justice never fully caught up with him over Mary's assault alone. He served less than a decade, got paroled, then continued displaying violent, sociopathic behavior. Police found him in the 90s, attempting to strangle another woman in his home. After Mary's case brought changes to California law, this time he got convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, although he died of natural causes in prison before the sentence could be carried out. Mary understandably struggled to rebuild her life back home in Las Vegas. With the trauma she endured and the loss of her arms, her dreams of being a dancer were over. Mary Vincent made it through this almost unbelievable tragedy against all odds. But getting back to normal was understandably a lifelong challenge. These days, Mary is living privately, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, focused on her art and loving her family. She has 2 sons and is hopefully finding some form of peace after all she's endured over the years.